Back we live with you tonight here on In Focus. Sadtu is calling on the Department of Basic Education to provide better infrastructure, learning and teaching material on time. The Teachers Union says the department should at all material times support teachers for effective teaching and learning to take place. This comes after reports on the first day of the 2023 academic year that more than 5,000 pupils in Gauteng, Mpumalanga and Limpopo still remain unplaced. And for more on this, we are now joined by Xolani Fakude, the head of the secretariat with the South African Democratic Teachers Union. Xolani, good to have you and Happy New Year. Thank you so much for your time. Should your statement not be reading, "We plan for effective teaching and learning," not "we wish for effective teaching and learning"?
Thank you very much, Tibos. Firstly, let me greet you and let me greet the viewers as well. Thank you very much for the opportunity. We do appreciate it as a union. And you are correct, perhaps, Tibos, that in hindsight, that is precisely what our statement should have said, that this is what we plan for. However, we've got a reality on the ground that we now must contend with. Now, as much as education workers, what we wanted is for the first day of school to be used effectively already for teaching and learning, because it also is about how you set the mood for the rest of the academic year. However, the reality of the matter is that as we see it right now, a majority of the inland provinces that actually reopened today fully academically are reporting a number of challenges. For instance, mainly they are based around learning and teaching support material, the delayed delivery thereof. And in some instances, for instance, like in Mpumalanga, the learning and teaching support material would have been, for some reason, reduced even by 50% in terms of the quantity that would be due to a particular school, which tells you that there is an issue of planning. And this is not just in Mpumalanga as you use. It is the same issue around the Free State. It is again the same issue around Limpopo as well. So it tells you that over and above the usual infrastructure challenges that we face, we also have got a challenge of efficiency and of planning and of implementation management, which also should be supported by consequences, for instance. So we would have said, and in fact what we are saying was that whilst the first day would have gone largely smoothly, there are still some significant challenges that we need to have a conversation about.
So these significant challenges, from my chat with Equal Education earlier on, they're saying we lacking data to help us plan better. For example, we make an observation, a fair one, to say part of the reason why some learners have not been placed is because of immigration. But we are lacking data that is going to help us to be able to pick up this movement of learners moving from one province to another, and therefore we are able to then plan accordingly. What needs to happen?
Well, I mean, Tibos, you are touching on a very critical issue. Now, when you look at the online system, the online application system for the grades 1 and 8, for instance, in Gauteng, it has been implemented for about 7 years by now. So it would have been our expectation, and rightfully, it should be the expectation of South Africans that by now, really, we should be able to improve the system such that parents can find it to be user-friendly. I mean, some of the comments that we are receiving is about how it is not necessarily user-friendly. Some parents still want to interface with a school administrator, a school teacher, a second administrator, and they find it to be somehow user-friendly. But now the question is, what lessons then do we pick up from the previous years? Because population dynamics and trends, Tibos, in Gauteng, they are not a surprise, really. We know them. They are trends. We do see the projections as well. They are not necessarily a secret, statistically speaking. But now the question is, how then do we then use that data? We would argue very strongly, for instance, that somehow the data might even be there. It is not just about the data not being there. The data, scientific as it is, might be there. But the question is, what then do we do about the data? When we speak about implementation, that is why we always say, Tibos, that we've got very nice policies as a country in terms of education and other public services. But now the question is, how then do we implement those? Now, there is an interesting dynamic in closing. There is an interesting dynamic that we also see emerging. It is also the influence of private businesses that they seem to be having in the value chain of education. For instance, we've got an issue around learning and teaching support material in Limpopo, whereby service providers would even go to the extent of recommending prices for additional stationery. That seems to be not in sync with a no-fees paying school, for instance. So those are some of the conversations that we believe we should have as a country.
Yeah. So you're saying we are not reading that data properly, and therefore, as a result, are we then responding adequately in terms of, one, resources, as you put it, but two, also as a way of putting in place the necessary infrastructure to be able to cater for the growing numbers of learners that, for example, would be coming to urban areas as opposed to those who are in rural areas?
Well, Timos, it is about how we deploy resources in the context of a budget with competing priorities. But what we know also is that education is still seen as an apex priority. So, for instance, it is as we want to emphasize that it is also about how we implement what we already know from the data and the tools. That is why we are saying that we all do know what kind of urbanization trends to expect in a province with peculiarities like Gauteng, for instance. But now, if we do know, why then do we still have such huge numbers of unplaced learners? In fact, we can even take it further, that consistently over the last decade, we have seen even a similar trend in the Western Cape, for instance. We'll talk about that when the coastal schools open. But we can already tell you that these are the trends from a migration point of view. But now, what do we do with that information? What is the point or the levels of accountability that we even put for those that are meant to implement? For instance, it was the fact that in a province like Free State, for instance, you get learning and teaching support material being supplied, even though it is late, but it is not completely in sync at all with what the school actually needs, according to what the numbers that the schools has enrolled, for instance. So now we are saying, and we're asking ourselves that at what point then do we have very stringent consequence management and other accountability mechanisms put in place?
Yeah. Why are you saying schools, for example, and you're making an appeal to schools around issues of policy? Why have we not tied up issues around admission policy, around race and ethnicity, culture, and those issues? Why are those areas still pretty much so loose?
Well, I mean, it was one reality that we always must speak sharply about so that we can have a consistent conversation, is that education, by all means, is a reflection of what happens in society, in the communities. What you see happening in the schools is precisely what you see in the communities. So some of those observations are leading us to a conclusion that we really do need to have a paradigm shift. It is about a paradigm shift around how, as a country, we see priorities, especially in the context of what we've got as national developmental goals. When we speak about a resourcing education, we are not just saying it because it is nice to say, and it even sounds nicely politically to us. However, we do know that as a country, we've got objectives, we've got plans, we've got certain strategic goals that we want to achieve collectively. And we know that education plays a decisive role in that particular context. So it is all about how we then keep the conversation going. For instance, as we are saying, that some of the trends, we've seen them, they've been there for the past decade. Yeah. We know what will happen in Gauteng. Yeah. We know what will happen in the Western Cape, around the Cape Metro, etc., in terms of school placement, in the context of what you would see in the areas like Khayelitsha, compared to areas in the urban of the Cape Metro, for instance. We know those trends. But now the question is, as a country collectively, how then do we hold those responsible to implement, accountable, so that we can see and reach our objectives?
You see, when you say we know, it worries me because, for example, in a sense, that would essentially also mean that you know that there are particular schools that are vandalized. You know that there are particular schools with missing equipment. So when the eve of the reopening hits and we ask the department the question, what's the level of readiness? And the department says, it's all systems go. It's either they are really just paying lip service to say it's all systems go, or worse, they could just merely be lying to us. But even more worse, maybe they could be sitting there and they are not aware. They really don't know what the state of the schools are. And then you have a situation where there's a school in Soweto where parents are saying, our kids are not going to go into this school because the conditions are just not safe for them to go in there and learn.
No, well, you are raising a very critical point once again. And yes, you are correct. I mean, for us, it is about how do we use the data that we have. We believe that there are systems. We believe that there are actually monitoring and evaluation systems. We also have them as a union of education workers, and they always do give us those particular indications. But now, perhaps let us take it a bit further and say that this is precisely what we are saying as an organization, that the conversation needs to be consistent. Let's talk about the role that communities play in the context of education. When we speak about vandalizing, for instance, we are going to be approaching the 2024 national elections, and we know that more often than not, political organizations in communities sometimes find themselves even utilizing education, local schools, as political bargaining chips. We know that we're going to be seeing many incidents, once again, by our very own community members, whereby they would deliberately try to block the normal processing of certain schools in certain communities because we want potholes, for instance, to be fixed in our area. So now that tells you that we need a paradigm shift. This is a national conversation that we need to have. That when you say that schools must be havens of safety, in real terms, practically, tangibly, what do we apply to those? What we are saying, it was also very, very critically, is that we cannot have a situation whereby we have austerity measures being applied towards public services in particular. We are told every year how we do not have adequate or enough teachers, for instance. But we can tell you also, as a union of education workers, that we've got many qualified and unemployed education workers as we speak right now. We still have got many temporary teachers, yet they're substantive posts. So it means that we need to have this conversation about, as a collective, really, if we want to see our goals come to fruition.
Yeah. What's the extent of those temporary teachers?
Well, look, we believe that they are quite deep, by the way, We believe that when we speak about resourcing issues in the context of education, for instance, they immediately affect education infrastructure. Now, when you say you want a safe environment in a school that can ensure that proper teaching and learning takes place at an optimal level, but at the same time, you do not have adequate resourcing for even the physical infrastructure, then it tells you that we need to have a deeper conversation. When we still speak, by the way, we are still speaking about the ideal school. What is the ideal school? And what are we saying as citizens of this country about what a school should be like? We are still seeing schools with pit toilets, by the way. In the rural provinces, we are going to be having or will be receiving those particular reports. We know that we still have got schools that do not have even the proper minimum required infrastructure, libraries, laboratories, but yet we expect education workers to have a particular yield. So what we are saying was that we do have got those long-standing national issues. Some of them, they affect most of the provinces. Some of them are peculiar to a province like Gauteng, given urbanization and migration dynamics, for instance. But what is important was that let us all then play a role in this conversation, and let's do it effectively so and deliberately so, by the way it was.
Much appreciated. Thanks for your time. Xolani Fakude, head of the secretariat for Sadtu.